Just when you think you've seen it all, across the pond in Great Britain, the story has become even more bizarre. Yesterday, Britain's highest court ruled that Prime Minister Boris Johnson gave Queen Elizabeth illegal advice when she prorogued Parliament earlier this month. It is yet another chapter in the Brexit saga, and where it ends, well, maybe tonight's guests know. And with that, let's welcome, in Cambridge, UK, via Skype, Graham Gudgin. He is Chief Economic Advisor, Policy Exchange London, and at the University of Cambridge. And here in our studio, a familiar face, Ashley Prime, formerly a British diplomat to Canada for 6 years. Ashley, it's good to have you back in that chair. Graham Gudgin, great to meet you, and thanks for joining us today from the UK. Let's start with, I guess, a clip that many of us have seen, but it was dramatic, it was historic, so we're going to look at it again. Lady Hale, the President of the UK Supreme Court, announcing a unanimous decision. Sheldon, roll it if you would.
The Court is bound to conclude, therefore, that the decision to advise Her Majesty to prorogue Parliament was unlawful because it had the effect of frustrating or preventing the ability of Parliament to carry out its constitutional functions without reasonable justification.
Graham Gudgin, to you first. What do you think the impact of that decision has been?
Well, it's hard to say. It doesn't actually make very much difference to Brexit because Parliament hasn't been prevented from doing anything that it wouldn't have otherwise done. And anything it wants to do in future, it would have had another fortnight at the end of the period to do anyway. So there's nothing to undo on Brexit. I think the impact is more one of political atmosphere in a sense. It's put the cat among the pigeons, and I think that there'll be a lot of potential or activity in Parliament trying to discomfort the government in various ways. But as far as the legal position of Brexit is concerned, very little difference.
Ashley, in your view, what's been the impact of the decision?
Well, I think it was, to be honest, I was very surprised at that. A unanimous decision by all Supreme Court judges. To be honest, I thought they were going to kick it out. They were going to kick it back and say, look, this is a political decision where the Supreme Court has no locus, and therefore, no, this is not a decision that we should be taking. So firstly, I think I'm slightly surprised at that unanimous outcome. And of course, it wasn't about Brexit per se. It was about the legitimacy of whether Parliament should have been prorogued or not.
Well, let me pick up on that. Do you agree with the court that this prorogation inappropriately prevented Parliament from carrying out its functions without justification?
I think that was probably right, but underlying all of that, of course, was the elephant in the room, which, of course, is Brexit. I mean, that was, why did Boris Johnson prorogue Parliament? Because of Brexit. Of course he did. Everybody knows that. That I don't think is anything that's, not known. But, as I said, I'm still very surprised that they came to that unanimous decision.
Graham Gudgin, I should get you on that same question. Do you think the Prime Minister was essentially trying to restrict democracy by apparently now illegally proroguing Parliament?
Well, of course he was. I agree with Ashley that this was all about Brexit. But on the other hand, it wasn't illegal at the time they did it. The Supreme Court has made new law here. Only 2 weeks ago, the High Court in England said it wasn't a matter for the courts at all. The government's own lawyer, the Attorney General, seems to have advised much the same. So this is a retrospective view, really, that it was illegal. It would be illegal if it was done now, but it's hard to say that it was illegal when it was actually done, when it was begun 2 weeks ago.
So do you think the High Court made a mistake in its unanimous ruling?
No, I think it's just lawyers disagree, don't they? This is a very fine judgment. And in many ways, this is a political judgment by the Supreme Court. It's part of this creeping world that we live in, where the judiciary is taking over more and more of what used to be the political world and political decisions. The difficulty we have in the UK, a difference from the US, for instance, is nobody knows who these 11 high Supreme Court justices are. In the US, this would be a political matter. And I think if the Supreme Court starts to make political decisions like this, then we'll have to move to something like the US, I'm afraid.
Ashley, I do want to follow up with you on that, because this isn't a law of Parliament they have found unlawful. It is essentially a parliamentary procedure.
Correct.
And I wonder whether you are at all troubled at the notion of a panel of judges overruling a political decision of the Prime Minister.
Well, I think ultimately, yes, it is about politics. And they, in my view, they overstepped there and they didn't come up with what I expected. And they've put the cat among the pigeons. I mean, this morning we've seen that Parliament is back, the doors are open again, and they're at it like cat and dog in a way that we thought we'd seen before. But my goodness, this morning's exchanges, particularly with our Attorney General, just shouting across the floor, because both sides, I think, in a sense, the government is being pushed into a corner because of this, and in my view, unexpectedly. And of course, the Remain cabal in the Conservative Party, as well as Labour, SNP, etc., i.e. the Remain group, see this as a fantastic opportunity, really, to make life that much more difficult for the government as we head towards the 31st of October, which is just a few days away now.
Graham Gudgin, I should ask you, I mean, one of the reasons that this has become, I guess, so scandalous is that the accusation is the Prime Minister of your country misled Her Majesty the Queen in giving the advice to prorogue Parliament. Do you believe the Prime Minister misled the Queen?
We've no idea what the Prime Minister said to the Queen, and in a sense it doesn't matter. The UK Constitution, as far as we have a Constitution, is that the Queen, if the Prime Minister wants the Queen to sign a prorogation, then she has to sign. It may have been that no reason was given. We really don't know that. So that's just surmise. It's just the opposition parties trying to give the Prime Minister a hard time, which, after all, is their job.
But Ashley, I think the Queen is quite beloved in the United Kingdom. I think that's fair to say.
She's indeed.
If her First Minister gave her unlawful, misleading advice, how would the British public regard that?
Well, I think that it certainly wounded Boris Johnson. And my advice to Buckingham Palace, not necessarily to the Queen, would be that if we're in the same position towards the end of October and the Prime Minister wants to prorogue Parliament again, my advice from Buckingham Palace would be to number 10, saying, don't come anywhere near us. The Queen would be damned if she does. She'd be damned if she didn't.
OK. I do want to have a better understanding of how this now has an impact, one way or another, on the October 31st deadline of Brexit. This is clearly another, it's just another part of the, can I use this word, freak show? It's another part of the freak show in a way that has us marching, or has you marching, towards the 31st of October. What impact does all of this have on all of that? Yeah.
Well, I think, firstly, from the new Boris Johnson administration, they felt that there was a kind of linear line between now and getting out of the EU on the 31st of October. And, it was never going to be easy. Of course, it was always known that there was a group of Tory MPs who would side with the opposition. Nobody at the moment on the opposition benches, particularly the Labour Party, whose position on Brexit has been ambiguous. My personal view is I think that actually has helped the government, that the Labour Party have been tearing themselves apart, so in a sense taken away that narrative from the government. But as we head further down that road toward the 31st of October, almost anything could happen. I think for number 10, they need to look at a way of putting that, if you like, the blame, if it all goes pear-shaped, and it may well do, put that on the European Union. I still do not believe that the European Union nor the United Kingdom is actually ready for a no deal. Remember, too, that there is the Benn Amendment, that legislation which in effect takes a no deal off the table for the UK government. So I think that little bit of room for Boris Johnson is probably getting smaller and smaller, and that the can is still being kicked down a road which is shorter and shorter and shorter. I guess we should establish the fact here that you were in favor of Britain remaining in the EU. Graham Gudgin, I believe, is in favor of the United Kingdom leaving the EU. So I should ask you to follow up on Ashley's point and find out from you how you feel the events of this week either do or do not have any impact on the deadline approaching.
I agree with Ashley. I think this makes it more difficult, but it was already an intensely difficult situation because the Benn Amendment really rules out no deal. And what it actually does is say that the government has to accept any deal that the EU offers in whatever timescale the EU prefers. I mean, this is an absurd situation that the government finds itself in. But nevertheless, the Prime Minister keeps saying that we will leave on October the 31st. That's his big policy, that's his big aim. But as it stands, that's technically illegal, so we don't know how he's going to do that. the easiest way to do it is to get some sort of deal, but there's no longer any incentive for the EU to move at all or to agree anything that's could be regarded as a compromise. I mean, they'll just offer the deal that they've offered before.
Graham Gudgin, let me follow up with this. You know, Jeremy Corbyn, the opposition leader, has basically accused the Prime Minister of cocking this whole situation up so badly that, well, I guess over here we would say he ought to resign. Over there, I gather you folks say he should consider his position. Do you think he should?
No, not at all. He's the only hope we have now in the UK of actually honouring the referendum. I mean, as your viewers will know well, we had a referendum in 2016. 17.5 million people voted to leave the EU. We still haven't left. And if Parliament has its way, we will never leave. So it's imperative that Boris Johnson stays where he is. And I'm sure he will. He's no intention of resigning, I think.
Ashley, should he consider his position?
Well, I think he should for a microsecond. But then I also think that the Leave cabal in Parliament, he will be held hostage by them. His room for manoeuvre is that much smaller. And actually within the Conservative Party, is this time for another leadership contest? Forget it. You know, they've done enough damage to themselves. They've managed to rip themselves apart in the way that equally I think the Labour Party have as well. Jeremy Corbyn, in a sense, is Boris Johnson's best ally, ironically. I mean, and don't forget the party which 2 years ago was dead and buried. The Liberal Democrats, you know, we'd forgotten about them. They've been, in a sense, the beneficiaries of this total chaos. The sort of obfuscation by the Labour Party on what is their policy. You know, they're as divided as the country are. They're as divided as the Tory Party are. And they have, in a sense, contributed to the total chaos that is our Parliament today. So, you know, I think he should consider his position for a microsecond, but he should stay there. In fact, I don't think he can get out of it now. Having said that, I think he would poke his eyes out rather than go to Brussels asking for an extension. And if the EU is minded to give an extension, which I think it is, despite the rhetoric of the French and others, I think the Commission there will pull rank and pull the member states together. I'm not sure that they would say, yes, you can have another 3 months to get through a general election or whatever. I think they would offer a longer term than that to really give the UK even more time. So that can just gets kicked down the road further and further and further. I
should ask Graham the same question. Do you see that can being kicked further down the road by Brussels?
Oh, absolutely, yes. But Brussels will offer an extension. And again, once again, I agree with Ashley that they'll probably offer a long extension, at least 6 months. So what's happening here is we're actually staying in the EU by a series of extensions which just go on and on and on. Very bad for business, a lot of uncertainty. Really is quite important now to get this finished. And it's important, therefore, that the Prime Minister is allowed to do what he's promised to do.
As one who wanted Britain to leave the EU, how disappointed are you that this is taking far longer than presumably you thought it would?
Well, I think there's two answers to that. One is it is democracy working. You know, this is a very controversial decision. It's hard fought and it's fought backwards and forwards. But on the other hand, there is a very sizable group of people in the UK now who want to reverse a legitimate referendum decision, and the implications of that I think are very hard to say. But there'll be an awful lot of very angry people across the UK if that does happen.
Ashley, as somebody who wanted Britain to remain in the EU, are you happy about the fact that this is taking longer than people thought, in the hopes that perhaps there's still something down the road that might prevent it from happening?
Well, I have to say I'm not particularly happy of the last 3 years. If you go back to before the referendum and ask people, you know, how important is Europe? You need to get down to issue 6 or 7. You know, what's important to us in our lives was, you know, austerity, the economy, crime, pensions, healthcare, all the kind of stuff that, you know, we have to sort of deal with on a day-to-day basis. Europe was actually quite low down on the list. And the referendum called by David Cameron was really designed to do 2 things. One was to recapture that UKIP vote, and the other, of course, was to kind of silence the long-standing Eurosceptic members of his party who've been anti-Europe for decades. I mean, they're not new. And I think the idea was to shut them up for once, and then also to bring those UKIP voters back again. Well, you know, he went to Brussels beforehand, before the referendum, in some kind of getting the hope of a deal that would keep us in and silence his critics. he never got that from the European Union, and the rest is history. Be careful what you wish for. And I think the problem on the Leave side was actually, how do you do this? How do you get out of the European Union? And for Boris particularly, I always think, look at his body language on the morning of the referendum. It was, crikey, we won. Now what do we do? And him, Liam Fox, David Davis, the arch Brexiteers were all given those roles to get out of the EU, and eventually all of them individually sort of resigned, fell by the wayside. So I think there was a sort of lack of understanding that how integrated the United Kingdom had become, both socially and economically, particularly within the European Union, the single market, customs unions, which had just become part of our DNA. So, the Tory party, I think, have done themselves no service whatsoever, and they've taken the country with them.
David Cameron is on a book tour right now, pitching his memoirs. How's that going?
Well, I have to say I've started reading, and it's actually a pretty good read so far. But yeah, that's about his legacy. Of course it is. I thought his TV interview last week on ITV, he looked gaunt. He looked a man was shell-shocked, really. And I think, up until the point of the referendum, most of us considered, whether we agreed with him or not, a pretty decent prime minister. He was a man of service. He was a politician.
A decent prime minister, with the exception of making the worst strategic political gamble ever.
Since Suez, probably, yeah.
Since the Suez crisis, okay.
Yeah, I think that's fair, but it's about his legacy now. And does he wake up comfortable every morning? No, he does not.
I should ask Graham about that. All right, but Graham, number one, do you intend to read the book? And number two, how do you see the Cameron legacy looking right now?
Well, Cameron legacy is pretty bad. I mean, as you suggested yourself, Steve, other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how did it go? It went very well, other than Brexit, other than the really big thing. What comes over in what I have read of the book is how out of touch he was. He really didn't understand the depth of feeling across the country. And perhaps the message here for a lot of prime ministers is get out and about, to talk to your voters. What Ashley just said, I think, isn't quite right. I think it's true that polls didn't show that Brexit was very high in their concerns, but it was true that in the 2014 European elections, the Brexit Party actually came top. That's the first time in a national election since the Second World War that a party other than the Conservatives or Labour actually won an election. And that's what caused the referendum, of course. It really put the fear of God up the Tory party and David Cameron.
Graham, I wonder whether a general election in the UK right now would clarify matters at all. You have an unusual circumstance over there, in as much as the Prime Minister can't just go to the Queen and say, I want an election. He actually needs Parliament to okay it, and so far Parliament isn't okaying it. How is all of that affecting the state of play right now?
This is key. This is really the absolute elephant in the room. So normally in this position, the party would have lost its majority, go straight to an election, it would all be sorted out. Even if, as in Israel, you've got an indecisive election, we'd go to another election until it was decided. But we're in a stupid situation now, a crazy situation, in which the government is short of a majority by 40 seats. I mean, it's a mile off a majority. But Parliament won't vote for a general election because we have a silly act of Parliament now, which says that Parliament should run the full 5 years unless Parliament agrees not to do that. And so we're in a position now where the opposition parties, Labour and the Lib Dems, are scared of an election. They think they'll lose it. So they're refusing to have one. And they're keeping a zombie government in power. I mean, this is a bizarre and unprecedented situation. So if the Tories win the next election, I think the very first thing they'll do is get rid of that Act of Parliament, which has been so destructive.
Can you actually just sort of help us understand the political calculation around that? If Boris Johnson and the Conservatives are so discredited in the eyes of so many right now, why would Jeremy Corbyn and Labour and the Lib Dems be so afraid to go to the polls right now?
Well, I think the problem for our politics at the moment, and that is that we are so divided. The Tory party is seen as very, very right-wing. They don't occupy that kind of centre ground anymore. Equally, the Labour Party have gone so far to the left, and Momentum, which has been part of the Labour movement, have dragged Jeremy Corbyn, or Jeremy Corbyn have dragged them to the left as well. So that centre ground where UK politics generally kind of kicks the ball around, that's where we're kind of happiest with, has been vacant for a while. I cannot see that the Labour Party are going to pick up as many votes as they want in some of the northern heartlands, which they need to win. Brexit divided communities are all over the country. If you look at the 2015 election, the UKIP voters went back to the Tory party, but they also went back to the Labour Party as well. So the Labour Party, you know, I think probably, well, they did better than was expected at the time. As I said before, I think the Liberal Democrats have come from behind, but could they form a government? In my view, absolutely not.
But there's a Brexit party now too, right?
There is a Brexit party.
And what impact are they having on things?
Well, at the moment, they're sitting waiting to see how the cards fall, and, you know, as we all are. And I think for the moment they are going to be there. If we get a deal of some sort, I think the Brexit party will disappear. People will say, OK, we're out of the European Union and, you know, we'll kind of forget about the Brexit. We're out of the EU now. Yes, we've got a deal, whatever. And we won't worry about the customs union and the single market so much. So I think if Boris Johnson can get a deal, which I don't think he can, I think that's probably the end of the Brexit party.
Graham, let me ask you about what happens in the UK post-Halloween. You know, you've heard this expression that, you come to the deadline for the Brexit agreement, and if there's no deal, somehow Britain is going to go over a cliff. They're at the cliff's edge or that kind of thing. What do you see ahead if there's no agreement by the 31st of October?
Well, if we do go out with no deal, I see a bit of short-term disruption. You know, you can't avoid that after 40 years in an organisation, but nothing terribly serious. I mean, as an economist, I've looked at this in great detail, and I find all this cliff edge stuff and predictions of shortages of food and medicines and so on, it's just ridiculous propaganda. I mean, none of that is going to happen. No chance at all. So we will get through that okay. I think the real problem with no deal is probably the bad feeling, the poor relations that we may have with the EU for quite a few years going forward. I mean, that's obviously a bad outcome. What we want out of this is we want to leave the EU on the best possible terms with on friendly relations with our near neighbours, and it's kind of looking as if that might not happen, and that would be a great pity.
Ashley, your view of a no deal post October 31st? Yeah,
I think that there will be a lot of discomfort. I think you hear the sort of horror stories of sort of Dover collapsing and Calais on the other side as well, where a lot of our food and goods come in.
But he just said that's ridiculous. Do you buy it?
Well, to be honest, I don't think we're ready enough for a no deal. I mean, the rhetoric is, yes, we're getting ready for a deal and business needs to get ready, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't actually see that. Neither side, neither Europe nor our side, think are ready for a no deal per se. And I think there's sort of other things that have never really been looked at, and, how do you deal with it? And immigration, I think, still is the touchstone in all of this. What happens on the 1st of November with an EU national arriving at Heathrow? The UK government does not know whether they've been living in the United Kingdom or not for any time, whether it's 5 years or longer. The other problem for me too, which has never really been looked at, is what happens to an EU national arriving in Dublin off a flight from Rome, Paris, Milan. If there is no border, they could freely walk into into Northern Ireland and therefore into the United Kingdom without any immigration controls at all, unless you're going to put some kind of border between the UK and Northern Ireland, which of course would be unacceptable to the DUP and would impact the integrity of the UK itself. So, but then there's another side, and I totally agree with Graham on the point about the relationship, the atmospherics. I think it's going to leave a bitter taste for a long while. And I think it would make Europe weaker. I think it would make us weaker in the United Kingdom. And the idea of sort of flitting off into the sunlit uphills to do trade deals, I think personally is fantasy. I mean, I was involved in the EU-Canada trade negotiations, which were fairly straightforward. I mean, it took a long time, and that is the point. It takes a long time to do these trade deals. The UK has no expertise to do that, and it still took 9 years for the EU and Canada to do a deal.
Graham, I've got 30 seconds left to ask you one last question, and that is, How do you think former UK Prime Minister Theresa May feels right now?
Thank you. Good questions. Pretty awful, I think. But she's made a huge mess of it. I think we'll have 50 years of PhDs trying to work out what on earth Theresa May was trying to achieve. So she's probably as confused as the rest of us are about what she was trying to do.
Well, I must confess, we always love having Brits on this program because you guys have the greatest expressions talking about cats among pigeons and pear-shaped scenarios going forward. So we'd love to have you two back on at some point once this thing goes a little further down the road. Graham Gudgin from the University of Cambridge, we thank you for being there for us via Skype. Ashley Prime, the former UK diplomat to Canada, thanks for being here in Toronto with us.
You're welcome.
You're welcome.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.